400 years ago, deep in the era of the samurai, warriors faced a challenge that feels strangely familiar today. It wasn't just the threat of enemy blades or brutal battles, it was the invisible enemy within: hesitation, resistance, what we call today laziness. But here's the shocking part. The samurai didn't believe laziness even existed. To them, what looked like idleness was never weakness of character. It was information. It was strategy. And out of this radical view, they developed a method so powerful, it could eliminate laziness without using willpower, brute discipline, or motivational tricks. That method was called Kutsu, and it was built on 3 deceptively simple principles that modern psychology is only now beginning to confirm. Think about it. You can binge Netflix for hours without feeling lazy, yet when it comes to your most important work, you freeze up, stall, or avoid it entirely. The energy is there. You're not physically drained. So why does your brain rebel at the very things that matter most? The samurai cracked this mystery centuries ago. They realized resistance wasn't an enemy to crush. It was a signal, a code to be read. And once you know how to interpret it, tasks that once felt impossible suddenly feel natural, even effortless. This wasn't about forcing themselves through sheer determination. In fact, the samurai knew that relying on willpower was a guaranteed way to burn out, lose focus, and make mistakes that could cost them their lives. Instead, they asked, what is this resistance trying to tell me? What is it pointing to that I cannot yet see? That mindset didn't just change how they fought, it changed how they lived. And it's the reason Kutsu survived, passed down quietly for centuries as a system that transforms hesitation into clarity and laziness into action. But here's the twist. Kutsu isn't just a relic of the past. In our modern world of endless distractions, productivity hacks, and quick-fix advice, its principles are more relevant than ever. Because the truth is, laziness has never been the real enemy. And if you want to finally break free from that cycle of starting, stopping, and shaming yourself for not doing enough, you have to see through the illusion the same way the samurai did. Laziness is an illusion. We grow up being told that laziness is a flaw in our character. Teachers call it procrastination. Bosses call it a lack of discipline. Society calls it weakness. What if none of that was true? What if the very idea of laziness was nothing more than a misunderstanding? The samurai believed that hesitation, the pause before taking action, wasn't laziness at all. It was strategy. Imagine standing on the battlefield, charging forward blindly meant death. That brief moment of hesitation, the stillness before the strike, wasn't weakness. It was perception. It was the difference between life and death. To rush without clarity was to guarantee defeat. Now think about your own life. Why is it that you can spend 6 hours scrolling, streaming, or gaming without any resistance, but the moment you try to start an important project, it feels like you've hit a wall? The energy didn't suddenly vanish. The problem isn't that you're lazy. The samurai would say you're misreading the signal. Modern psychology actually agrees. Studies show procrastination has little to do with poor time management. It's about emotional regulation. We avoid tasks that stir up discomfort, fear of failure, uncertainty, boredom. That uneasy feeling we call laziness is really your mind whispering, something about this approach isn't right. Here's the truth. Most productivity gurus won't tell you. Laziness isn't the disease, it's the symptom. Treating it with sheer force of will is like taking painkillers without addressing the broken bone. You can push for a while, but sooner or later, the resistance comes back stronger. The samurai knew better. They didn't waste energy blaming themselves for hesitation. They looked deeper, asking, what exactly is this resistance trying to show me? And that simple shift in perspective changed everything. Because the moment you stop labeling yourself as lazy, the fog begins to lift. Instead of seeing yourself as broken, you start recognizing the specific obstacles blocking your path. And once you see them clearly, you can deal with them directly. That's the first step of Kutsu, piercing the illusion. Principle 3. Pause, strategic positioning. If seeing through the illusion of laziness is the first step, and learning to read resistance is the second, then the third principle of Kutsu is where everything comes together: strategic positioning. The samurai understood a truth most people ignore. Victory rarely came from brute force. It came from shaping the battlefield before the first strike was even made. As Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary swordsman, once wrote, "Victory belongs to the one who prepares the ground." In other words, the warrior who controlled the conditions controlled the outcome. This same wisdom applies far beyond combat. Most productivity advice today tells you to push harder, summon willpower, grind, force yourself through. But Kutsu reveals why that fails. If the conditions are against you, no amount of brute effort can save you. Strategic positioning, however, changes everything. It makes action feel inevitable. So what does strategic positioning actually look like in daily life? It unfolds across three layers. Physical positioning. Your environment silently shapes your behavior. A cluttered desk breeds distraction. A phone buzzing within reach tempts you into endless scrolling. But clear the space and the mind clears too. Some tasks demand silence. Others flourish with background noise. Even standing versus sitting can shift your energy. The samurai knew that the way you positioned your body, your stance, your tools, determined how the battle unfolded. You can do the same with your workspace. Mental positioning. This is about reframing the task itself. Instead of saying write an entire report, reduce it to draft the first sentence. Instead of facing a massive undefined project, break it into obvious next steps. Kutsu teaches that by shrinking the mental barrier, you weaken resistance before it can even rise. The warrior didn't think about winning the entire war in a single swing. He focused on the strike in front of him. Social positioning. The people around you are part of your battlefield. Work alone, and resistance multiplies. Work with allies, and momentum builds. Public commitments, accountability partners, or simply surrounding yourself with others who share your goals creates invisible pressure to follow through. The samurai trained in groups, fought alongside comrades, and drew power from the presence of their clan. Your environment of people can either anchor you or propel you. Take the story of Gohan, a developer who constantly missed deadlines. For years he tried forcing himself with productivity hacks and motivational tricks. Nothing stuck, but when he applied Kutsu, he stopped fighting himself and changed his positioning. He placed his desk against a blank wall, worked standing up with 25-minute timers, and removed every distraction from sight. The result was almost effortless focus. What years of willpower couldn't achieve, positioning accomplished in a matter of days. This is why Musashi's wisdom holds true even centuries later. The master doesn't fight desperately. He positions carefully. The novice wastes energy pushing forward against resistance. The master rearranges the ground so that resistance dissolves on its own. And once you start practicing strategic positioning, something remarkable happens. You realize you no longer need to wrestle with yourself. The conditions do the heavy lifting. Action stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like the only natural choice. But the samurai didn't just stop at these three principles. They wove them together into a step-by-step system, one you can apply right now to transform your relationship with work, focus, and resistance itself. Principle 1. See through the illusion. The first principle of Kutsu is disarmingly simple, yet it's the foundation of everything. You must learn to see through the illusion of laziness. Because what most people call laziness is never the real problem. It's only the surface smoke from a deeper fire. Think about the last time you put off something important. Maybe it was sending that email, starting your workout, or tackling a big creative project. You told yourself you were just being lazy. But was that really it? Or was there something else hiding underneath? Fear, uncertainty, or the crushing weight of not knowing where to begin. Take James, for example. He wanted to write a book. He had the ideas, the passion, even the time carved out on his calendar. But every time he sat down to start, he found himself scrolling, snacking, or cleaning his apartment instead. He felt defeated, convinced he was too lazy to ever follow through. But when he applied the first principle of Kutsu, he discovered the truth. It wasn't laziness at all. It was uncertainty. He didn't actually know how to structure his book, and that fog of confusion was the resistance he kept mislabeling as a personal flaw. Once he mapped out the structure, writing didn't just become easier, it became effortless. This is the power of piercing the illusion. The samurai understood it well. On the battlefield, hesitation was not weakness. It was information. To call it laziness would have been laughable. A warrior who paused before striking wasn't being idle. He was reading the terrain, studying the opponent, adjusting his stance. That laziness saved lives. The same applies today. When you feel resistance, the worst thing you can do is attack yourself. Every time you say, "I'm just lazy," you shut the door to understanding what's actually happening. And when you shut that door, you lock yourself into a cycle of shame and wasted energy. But the moment you treat resistance as a signal, everything shifts. That heaviness in your chest before opening a spreadsheet, maybe it's not laziness. It's your brain telling you the task is too vague. Break it down into smaller steps, and suddenly the fog lifts. That reluctance to work on a project late at night, maybe it's not laziness. It's timing resistance. Your energy peaks in the morning, not the evening. The samurai called this seeing with clear eyes. It's the discipline of noticing resistance without judgment and asking, what is this really? What is it showing me? This question separates the novice from the master. And once you see through the illusion, laziness itself starts to dissolve. You realize there was never a flaw in your character to begin with. There was only information you hadn't learned to decode. But the samurai didn't just stop at recognition. They learned how to use resistance itself as an ally, as raw material that could be redirected into power. And that brings us to the second principle of Kutsu, one that completely flips how we think about procrastination. Principle 2. Read resistance as information. If the first principle of Kutsu is about piercing the illusion of laziness, the second principle takes it further, learning to read resistance as valuable information. Because once you stop treating hesitation as an enemy, you can begin to see it as a guide. The samurai understood this on the battlefield. Facing an opponent, they knew charging head-on was suicide if the enemy held the advantage. Instead, they used the opponent's strength against them, redirecting the very force meant to destroy them. Resistance works the same way. Instead of fighting it, Kutsu teaches us to study it, because resistance always carries a message. It tends to appear in 3 distinct forms, each revealing something different. Method resistance. This happens when your approach doesn't match the task. Think of someone trying to brainstorm while staring at a blank page, when what they really need is a conversation to spark ideas. The method is wrong, so the brain throws up a wall. Timing resistance. Sometimes the work itself isn't the issue, but the moment you've chosen. Ever tried to do deep creative work late at night, only to feel your brain crawling through mud? That's not laziness. It's your body telling you the timing is off. Purpose resistance. The most brutal of all. This shows up when the task itself doesn't align with what really matters to you. You can trick yourself for a while with willpower, but deep down, your brain resists because it knows the work doesn't connect to your values. Take Michael, a programmer who constantly stalled on projects he should have been excited about. Every time he sat down to code, resistance hit like a wall. He blamed himself, convinced he lacked discipline. But when he applied Kutsu, he realized the truth. It wasn't laziness. It was method resistance. He wasn't meant to work in isolation. The silence of solo work drained him. The moment he joined a team, his resistance evaporated and his productivity skyrocketed. This is why fighting resistance backfires. Forcing yourself through it means working against your own rhythms, your own strengths, your own deeper needs. You might get the task done, but the cost is burnout, poor quality, and a growing belief that you're broken. The samurai would call this fighting strength with strength, a battle you're destined to lose. Instead, Kutsu teaches us to ask, what kind of resistance am I experiencing? What's the message hidden inside it? Because once you decode it, you can redirect it. Method resistance. Adjust your approach. Timing resistance. Shift your schedule. Purpose resistance. Reconnect with why the task matters, or let it go entirely. This shift sounds small, but it changes everything. Suddenly, resistance isn't an obstacle, it's a compass. It tells you where you're misaligned and points you toward the conditions where action becomes natural. And once you learn to read resistance in this way, you unlock the samurai's most powerful weapon, strategic positioning. A principle so effective that it can make willpower almost unnecessary. The 5-step system, samurai, didn't leave their wisdom floating in abstract principles. They forged it into practice. Kutsu became more than a philosophy. It was a system. And what's remarkable is how easily its steps can be applied today without swords, armor, or ancient rituals. Here are the 5 steps the samurai used to dissolve resistance and make action inevitable. Step 1. Observation practice. When resistance arises, the instinct is to fight it or shame yourself. Kutsu demands the opposite. Pause for 30 seconds. Notice the sensation without judgment. Where do you feel it in your body? What thoughts accompany it? This practice, called seeing with clear eyes, separates you from the resistance. The samurai believed that clarity always preceded victory. Simply noticing breaks the trance. Step 2. Signal translation. Next, ask the 3 core questions. Is my method wrong? Is my timing off? Or does this task lack true purpose for me? This translation process turns resistance from fog into a roadmap. Instead of labeling yourself as lazy, you uncover the real obstacle. Often, the moment you name it, the resistance weakens. Step 3. Strategic environment design. Now reshape your battlefield. If your phone distracts you, move it out of reach. If noise derails you, create silence or add ambient sound that boosts focus. If mornings fuel your best work, protect those hours like sacred ground. The samurai positioned their armor, weapons, and terrain to gain every advantage. You must do the same with your environment. Step 4. Minimum viable action. The samurai knew that once a sword left its sheath, the fight had already begun. Action creates momentum. So don't commit to 2 hours of work. Commit to 1 sentence, 1 push-up, 1 step. Once you begin, inertia works in your favor. Psychologists now call this behavioral activation. The samurai simply called it decisive movement. Step 5. Flow cultivation. Finally, protect the momentum you've created. Use intervals of deep focus, followed by short breaks. Link tasks so that finishing one automatically begins another. Track your progress visibly, because every mark of progress creates a feedback loop that sustains motivation. The samurai didn't just strike once. They built rhythms of motion that carried them through the battle. Put these 5 steps together, and you realize the brilliance of Kutsu. It never asks you to fight yourself. It doesn't rely on grinding discipline or endless willpower. Instead, it teaches you to observe, decode, reposition, and move forward in alignment with your own nature. And when you do, laziness stops being a monster you wrestle with. It becomes a ghost that simply dissolves. But the samurai also knew transformation didn't happen instantly. The path unfolded in stages, phases that every warrior, ancient or modern, would have to walk through. The brain's hidden calculation. So if laziness is just an illusion, what's really happening inside your mind? The samurai believed hesitation was a form of intelligence, a signal, not a defect. And modern neuroscience backs this up. Every moment your brain is running a silent calculation. It weighs the effort a task requires against the reward you expect to gain. Think of it like an invisible scale inside your head. On one side, the energy you'll have to spend, and on the other, the value you'll receive. If that equation doesn't balance in favor of action, you feel it as resistance. Not because you're weak, not because you're flawed, but because your brain doesn't see the point in wasting resources. It's the same reason you can stay up until 3 a.m., binge watching a show. On paper, it looks like effort. You're still awake, still engaged, but the brain sees the payoff as immediate: comfort, dopamine, escape. Now compare that to opening up a blank document and trying to write the first sentence of a report. The reward feels distant, uncertain, maybe even painful. The calculation tilts. Resistance wins. But here's the catch. This calculation isn't always accurate. It can be distorted by fear, perfectionism, or unresolved questions about the task. The samurai understood this centuries ago. To them, hesitation wasn't proof of laziness. It was a sign that something about the value-to-effort ratio needed to be adjusted. Maybe the approach was flawed. Maybe the timing was wrong. Maybe the goal itself wasn't worth pursuing. Modern psychology has given this a name: emotional regulation. People don't put things off because they're incapable. They put them off because those tasks trigger negative emotions: stress, boredom, doubt. Procrastination, in other words, is your brain's attempt to protect you. It's a shield, not a weakness. And here's where the samurai perspective becomes so radical. Instead of fighting that shield, they learned to study it. What does my resistance mean? Where is the imbalance? Is this hesitation showing me danger, or is it simply revealing that I'm approaching the problem in the wrong way? This is the first real key to mastering laziness. Stop treating resistance as an enemy and start treating it as data. Once you do, the entire battlefield changes. You no longer waste energy forcing yourself forward. You reposition. You adapt. And that's where the first principle of Kutsu comes in, piercing through the illusion of laziness itself. But the samurai didn't stop there. They went further, learning how to turn resistance into fuel. And that's the second principle. The final samurai secret. 4 centuries ago, the samurai uncovered a truth most of us are only beginning to understand. Laziness was never the enemy. The real enemy was misperception, the blindness that made people waste energy fighting shadows instead of reading signals. And through Kutsu, they turned that illusion into a weapon of clarity. They taught 3 principles that still cut sharper than any blade. First, see through the illusion of laziness. What you call weakness is often just uncertainty, fear, or misalignment. Second, read resistance as information. Every hesitation is a coded message, telling you whether your method, timing, or purpose is out of sync. Third, position yourself strategically. Shape your battlefield, your environment, your mindset, your allies, so that the path forward becomes natural, almost inevitable. When you weave these together, something remarkable happens. Action stops feeling like a war against yourself. You stop burning out on willpower, stop drowning in guilt, stop calling yourself broken. Instead, you begin to move like the samurai, deliberate, precise, and unshaken by hesitation. The real promise of Kutsu isn't just that you'll get more done, it's that you'll change your relationship with doing itself. Tasks that once drained you will begin to flow. Resistance will shift from being a prison guard to being a guide. And laziness, that word you've carried like a curse, will vanish, because you'll finally see it was never real in the first place. So the next time you catch yourself saying, "I'm lazy," pause, remember the samurai. Ask instead, what is this resistance trying to tell me? That single question is the doorway into clarity, into flow, into the system that kept warriors sharp for centuries. Because in the end, the samurai weren't fighting laziness, they were listening to it. And in listening, they discovered the secret most of us miss. Mastery isn't about forcing harder. It's about arranging life so that the strike is inevitable. The transformation. The samurai knew that no warrior mastered Kutsu overnight. Transformation was not a single breakthrough, but a progression, a shift that unfolded in phases. And here's the remarkable thing: when you begin practicing these principles, you will walk through the very same stages they did centuries ago. Phase 1. Awkward awareness. At first, you'll notice your resistance patterns in a way that feels uncomfortable. Suddenly, you'll see just how often you delay, avoid, or judge yourself. This can be discouraging, but it's not a failure. It's the first sign of progress. The samurai described this as standing in the fog and finally realizing it is fog. Before, you thought it was solid stone. Now, at least you can see through it. Phase 2. Strategic experimentation. Once you learn to observe and translate your resistance, you'll begin testing different methods. Maybe you shift your writing from night to morning. Maybe you change the way you break down tasks. Maybe you alter your environment to reduce friction. Not every experiment will work, but each one sharpens your perception. The samurai never rushed blindly into battle. They tested, adjusted, and positioned themselves until the strike became obvious. In this phase, you're doing the same, shaping your battlefield. Phase 3. Preliminary flow. Then something extraordinary happens. You'll experience bursts of effortless productivity. Tasks that once felt like mountains begin to slide beneath your feet, like downhill paths. For the first time, you'll feel what the samurai meant when they said victory belongs to preparation, not force. These moments may not last forever at first. They come in waves, but each wave confirms you're on the right path. As you repeat these phases, something subtle but powerful takes place. The very concept of laziness begins to dissolve from your experience. You stop calling yourself lazy because the label no longer fits. You see hesitation for what it truly is: a message, a signal, an opportunity to reposition. The samurai believed that the highest mastery wasn't about swinging the sword harder. It was about making the strike inevitable. In the same way, the more you practice Kutsu, the more natural action becomes. What once drained you now energizes you. What once terrified you now intrigues you. The resistance that once held you hostage becomes your teacher. And here's the hidden promise: when you stop wasting energy fighting yourself, all that power returns to you. It flows into your creative work, your goals, your relationships. This is why the samurai said that true warriors conserve their energy for what truly matters. But there's one final step, the thought that ties the entire system together and leaves us with a truth as shocking today as it was 4 centuries ago.